argument. But I do appreciate that Dr. Hugh Ross to talk to us about his Genesis and so on. But God, in the Bible, God has talked about so many truth and revealed to us a lot of things that if somebody wants to figure that out, then decide to believe in God, it's going to be quite a journey. So I think that if you want to be, if you want to study university, then you go into university and then you study it, then you will graduate. But if you want to figure out, well, what I'm going to teach, do I want to learn? That will be somehow, will be require a lot of effort before, if they can come to some sort of
So
solution.
Hugh's goal in this video is to talk about the things that most people have an issue with. At the very beginning, he said, what many people think that science contradicts Genesis. So that's a major obstacle. If you can deal with that, it makes it a lot easier for a person to believe that the Bible is true.
Well, God also says in the Bible that one day is like 1,000 years, right?
Yeah.
for God. So I'm not like a pastor or professor in teaching this, but I find that God will be, if you believe in that, then you read the Bible. There will be many questions that you will have. So you pray to God and you want to if God can enlighten you with an answer. Usually you'll get it if you truly believe in it.
Yeah. Don, you want to say anything else? I'm not sure exactly what your question is, but go ahead, Raphael.
I think I understand what you're trying to say. I think if this is what you're trying to say, I think she's trying to say, like, do we really need scientific explanation in order to validate or confirm our faith, right? Is that kind of what you're saying? Like, you don't.
Well, what I'm saying is that there are people like this program is to explain to a lot of people who has some questions and so on. But like I said, that's my personal experience. That if anybody who really wants to figure out first and then believe, then they might have a big gap to catch on. But this is very good for people who are scientists, right? Who are scientific minded. So it will be very helpful. But can also let them know that, hey, first you believe, but they probably couldn't believe because they are too scientifically from the perspective of science. So that may be a big thing.
Maybe I think different people come to faith in God through all kinds of different means. There's no single way.
Right.
And I think it's an error to believe that if you provide somebody with enough good, strong arguments, whether they're scientific or otherwise, that will convince them to have faith in God. That's not true either. I have many friends who I have spent hours and hours debating with, well, not debating, but discussing, the basis for my faith and challenging their worldview, and they still don't believe. And so at the end of the day, somebody might just be, walking along the street and they see a sign that somehow touches them, in a very deep place, and they give their life to Christ right on the spot. So we hear all these stories, right? But Reasons to Believe in an organization exists precisely to help people who have scientific questions. That's why we're here. We're not here to answer all the other reasons that that are out there, but we're trying to provide answers to those people who have genuine obstacles to their faith. And we're trying to remove those obstacles so that they can take that next step. Even if you remove the obstacles, be they scientific or otherwise, there's no guarantee that the person will take that next step. But that's what we try to do. So that's a good point you brought up. I think it's very valid. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with, I just want to share, I agree with her with what she mentioned, and I agree with you too, with Phoenix mentioned. I'm a science graduate, so when I came to Christ, I felt him, you know, in my experiences, but along the process, because I was too logical and, you know, scientific, and I have to have the explanations, until I heard the voice of God really telling me, asking me, Caroline, who gives you breath? Who gives you the, because I had questions, like, I had so many questions and no one can answer me, until I heard the voice of God really telling me, who lets you breathe right now? And I said, you. Because at that point, I was struggling with my faith. And I think I had a lot of life experiences that were too challenging for me. And I'm like, why are these challenges existing if you are God? Like, you know, I had this and that, but he was teaching me to humble myself that, you know, like he knows that he's God and I am a human being.
Yeah.
And I had to hear his voice, like, who's letting you breathe right now, was giving you the air that you breathe. And I'm like, you. And then I stopped and, you know, I just like, God is real and science is real, and they're not conflicting each other, they're supporting each other.
Yeah. That's
So yeah, so I agree with your statements that yeah, the next step, you know, and then and God in his love and mercy and gentleness would really walk you through everything and tell you, like, Caroline, like I went to the beach and then just suddenly, like, if you step on the land and that body of water is not reaching you, when there can, if you stand on the sand, right, and the water is there, that body of water is not reaching you, anything can happen, right? That can have turbulence and reach you and just flood where you are. But then I just said, Lord, you are so magnificent that even this body of water where I stand and where it is, who controls that not to reach me is you. And I have this type of thoughts.
Yeah.
So it's him who is in control and him who made all things. Yeah.
That's
So
wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. That's
you're
a great story. Yeah, we really, you'll hear this, say this a lot. Bruno and I often say that everyone is welcome at our chapter meetings because everybody is on a journey.
yes.
And so people come in here who have no faith whatsoever. They have questions. They're maybe just interested. And then we have people who do have a very strong faith, but have questions about how their faith and science fits together. So we really welcome anyone to come, and we make sure that people here can ask their questions, feel safe. Nobody's going to attack you for what you believe. Even if you say something that's completely outrageous, nobody's going to embarrass you.
Yeah.
So that's part of who we are as well. So any other is there any questions from the audience or from our Zoom
Any of
audience?
the online viewers here, do you have any questions?
Bruno, I've got a question.
Go ahead.
You know, the evolutionists say that things happen very gradually over billions of years and all the rest, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of people think that God created things, individually, like he created, whatever, a lion, and it created this. But do you not think that God used the variability of DNA in order to allow him to make the fullness of the life that we have on Earth? Just like the virus that we're faced with right now has mutated to thousands or hundreds of different types of variations. Do you not think that God did a combination of creating and having a variation? What do you think about that?
Lon's gonna answer that.
So that's a great question, Chris. Thank you for asking it. It's interesting in your question, you mentioned two specific organisms. One was a lion, I believe, and the other was a virus. And one of the things that we know about evolutionary change is that it happens rapidly only with very, very small organisms, bacteria, viruses, etc. We don't see rapid evolution of animals, any kind of animal, be they so-called simple animals, right up to more complex animals like mammals. So the short answer to your question is, couldn't God have used an evolutionary process and a special creation process? Yes and yes. Where people get confused is they assume that evolutionary processes apply across all of the created order. And this is where the Bible is clear that God did intervene to specially create a number of organisms. Certainly mammals, the Cambrian Explosion is a great example that Hugh Ross mentioned, that even the evolutionary biologists like Richard Dawkins and others acknowledge that there is no explanation for how all these animals came into existence in a geological blink of an eye. And so that was God's supernatural hand of creation. But yes, bacteria, viruses, they do evolve. They evolve rapidly. We can observe it today right in the laboratory. And everybody is familiar with the fact that the COVID virus is mutating and changing. And so that's all that evolution is change over time. But large body parts, body plan animals do not evolve the same way as bacteria evolve. I hope that's helpful.
And the problem is because of the long lifespan of bigger creatures. A bacteria splits it in half to make 2 bacteria about every 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So every 20 minutes you got a generation basically. Where in human beings or even dogs, I think a dog can have, you could say maybe it's only like 3 or 4 years between a generation. But even that is long, very long compared to the lifespan of bacteria. So because you can have so many generations, you have so many opportunities for something to be changed in the DNA from one generation to the next. And because you have such huge numbers of them as well, so that multiplies the effect. And that's the only reason why they are able to mutate.
Okay, thank you very much. Good answer.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else?
I've added the camera view of the audience here. You see how there's lots of seats for you guys to come and join us.
Everybody wave.
Hey, Don, I have a question for you, if you don't mind. That will maybe help the group. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, can hear you, Robert.
Okay, so Brother Ross was talking about the oxidization event that happened when the oxygen went from like 0 to about 8 and then 10%, and also the isotope data. Can you explain the evidence that he's discovered and how does that support the view from Genesis? Just to clarify that for us, please.
Sure. So I believe that the evidence he's referring to is isotope data of the oxygen isotope, which exists. Standard oxygen is 16, but there's also a radioactive oxygen that has two extra neutrons, which is oxygen 18. And if you measure the ratio of those two, you can develop basically a curve for how much oxygen 16 and oxygen 18 existed at any particular time in history, because it has quite a long half-life. So it's basically, that's the kind of isotopic evidence that I think he's referring to. In addition, there are particular minerals, I believe, that trap oxygen, and those minerals can be analyzed to see the presence of, again, the oxygen 16, oxygen 18 ratios in those minerals.
Robert, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's pretty very super interesting. Just to that point though, Don, thank you for that, by the way. The actual part about the minerals, is that to do with the fossil records, or is that to do with other like like just sedimentary rock or metamorphosed rock or something that's different from the fossil records, or where are they gathering that the sampling from the isotopes?
Those are
Do we
from,
know that?
those are from core samples of the Earth. And they're not measuring fossils, they're measuring oxygen ratios of isotopes in the core samples.
Very good. So the what happened, can you explain exactly what happened during the oxidization of the Earth? So it seems like around 580 million years ago, there was a level of life that was a lot less, obviously. There wasn't a lot of opportunity for land animals. And so it seems like, if I'm accurately stating this, it seems like what Brother Ross is saying, Hugh Ross is saying, is that around day 3, it takes us up to about 580 million years before from time, and around this Cambrian explosion is where we have then these different animals that are coming in around that same time. Is that correct, or how do you explain the evolutionary unraveling of that over time?
So the Cambrian explosion were all water-based animals. They're all sea living organisms. There was no land animals at that point. The oxygenation of the Earth, basically Hugh's message is that the levels of oxygen in the atmosphere of the Earth went up as more and more complex animals were created by God. So you don't need 21% oxygen, which is the amount that we're breathing here tonight. You don't need that level of oxygen for the more primitive organisms that existed hundreds of millions of years ago. Also, there was a process by which the plants, as they continued to grow and build and populate the Earth, they provided a huge boost to the oxygen on the planet, and that's why plants had to come before animals. So by the time God was ready to create the more advanced animals like mammals, the level of oxygen in the atmosphere had to be boosted up to the mid to high 20s, or sorry, the low, let me start over, to the high teens, low 20s, which is where we sit today. So the key message is that this coincided with the presence of these animals. And so God basically prepared the planet in advance for the animals that he was going to create, including humans.
But I think what happens, because plants existed for so, I think he said it was like 400 million years before the Cambrian explosion.
Correct.
That they're producing oxygen during all this time, but the majority of that oxygen gets absorbed by the rocks. So there isn't enough in the atmosphere until the rocks get saturated with oxygen. At that point, then the amount of oxygen in the air will actually start going up. So it takes these plants to be around for a long time before the actual oxygen in the air starts to increase.
And keep in mind, there's also a lot of plants in the water that were
Yes.
also producing oxygen, and that water, oxygen was diffusing into the water. So that provided, again, oxygen for the animals that existed in the oceans before animals were created on land.
You had a question, Rafa?
Yeah, it's actually about the oxygen thing too. How exactly did the haze deplete oxygen? How did that work? It's the amount of haze in the atmosphere.
When the atmosphere went from translucent to transparent,
Yes.
yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. Where the level of oxygen was not high enough, there was much more CO2 in the atmosphere. So
They're not showing the video. They're all looking at the video. I can't see the video. I can't see what they're responding to.
They can hear you.
Oh, really? It's
So he talked about the early Earth being cloaked in darkness, even though the sun and the moon existed, the light couldn't penetrate. So that clearing of the atmosphere has to do with these oxygenation events that eventually provided for a transparent atmosphere rather than a translucent one that was dominated by CO2 and other gases and water vapor.
Okay. So the CO2 is actually like a cloudy gas.
Yeah, and water vapor, like literal clouds.
Okay.
So it was blanketed by this high content of water, CO2, and some other gases, that the oxygen slowly displaced until we have the atmosphere that we have today.
So how are the plants then able to like photosynthesis?
Because enough light could get through that they could pick up the actual light, but they couldn't see the you know, if you were on the surface of the earth, you would be able to discern. It's like on a really, really cloudy day, you have this vague idea that there's a bright light somewhere out there, but you can't see the sun, right? That's what we're talking about. This process took a long time. Good question.
And probably the plants that, because of the low level of sunlight, couldn't grow as fast as they do now, and maybe not as big, but still with enough plants that over a long period of time, you added enough oxygen to the atmosphere.
We've got a number of books at the back that really dive into these topics in a lot more detail. If you're interested, we can talk after we close the formal part of the meeting, and you can have a look at some of those. Some great books.
Well, Bruno, I've got another question. It's a bit of a tough one, but we're talking about creation and we're talking about soulish animals. And of course, man has souls. I'm just wondering if there's any sort of an explanation as to what a soul is or what it's made of. Is it multidimensional? I mean, we have them. It's just, do we have any idea how to describe it?
When Hugh talks about the word soulish, it's more than what the common understanding, I mean, it's not what the common understanding is of the word soul. It's to do with a creature that has a mind, a will, and emotion, which can describe your dog, it can describe a bird, but it can also apply to human beings, but the human beings have a fourth thing, which is the spirit. And it's only the spirit that enables us to relate to God. So when the word soulish means only characteristics that would exist even in an animal that has a mind, can look around, that can feel emotions, and can decide to do something. But it's nothing to do with your soul that maybe that you're thinking about when you die, your soul goes to heaven or goes down to hell. I think that's what you're thinking about, but that's not what that word meant in the Old Testament. Does that
Okay.
answer it or not?
Well, as far as our spirits are concerned, it's probably made of the same material as God because we can relate to God with our spirits. But is it do you have any idea? Is it a multi-dimensional type of energy, whatever? Is it? Because it is something, it's just, what is it, you know? Do you have any idea how to describe it?
No, I don't actually, but I don't think it's multidimensional because only God is multidimensional.
I see.
It would be up to God to take our spirit and move it from within our body. When we die, He would then bring it to heaven. But that's nothing to do with the way our spirit. I think it's God that enables us to make that jump.
I see. Okay.
Any other question from the online people? I know a few of you came in late and you probably missed the video. So I don't know if you have any questions. Somebody asked a question in the chat. What's the difference between the firmament and the sky? Don, you know the answer to that?
Not off the top of my head, I have to go look up the word.
Sorry, we don't, Fiona, we don't know the answer to that question.
There is an answer, but it's just, I don't want to steer you wrong.
And Fiona gives an example, you can maybe understand what the sky looked like. It's a foggy day in London, England.
Can I just bounce another question in? Our brother that asked the question about soulish and what is soulish. We're talking about spirit beings because when we were Genesis 2, we didn't get there, but God creates, or Genesis 1, God creates man in his image and likeness. The spirit being, is there so the question is, in the creation account in Job or Genesis, is there any inference to the creation of like angels or spirit beings that have both flesh and spirit that are not of our composition, like mind, will, and emotion? For example, you have the Watchers or something that angels with, spirit being with skin on, but not human. Do you understand?
Yes, I understand your question, and I don't think it actually says anywhere in the scripture any details about when God created the angels, as far as I can recall. You think of anything if that's right?
We know they exist.
There's nothing
Quite a bit written
mentioned.
about them in the Bible, but there's no sort of here's when God did that. It's probably because the answer is that it's outside of time. It's before time, before God created time as we know it.
So just to challenge you on that, sorry, Brother Don, but God creates, in the beginning, God creates heavens and the earth. The time's construct with energy, space, width, dimension, volume, everything. You're saying he created angels before he even created the heavens and the earth? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
And that's the reason why it's not written in the scriptures, because God starts in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, God in his realm clearly existed before he created the physical universe. And our understanding of angels and other spiritual beings is that they exist in a spiritual dimension, not of this physics. And so
Right.
that's why, all the, logical conclusion is that they existed prior to the creation of this earth.
So is it any wonder then that when David writes of it in Psalms 103, and you have Moses, I think, writing of perhaps Job writing about the stars of heaven, the inference of when all the stars gathered around, they create these accounts where the angels are mentioned, they must be, is that a testimony for the divine inspiration of scripture? Because how else would they know about these things and angels being created if they're not even within our time-space dimension, and universe for that matter, in terms of the.
Well, again, there are numerous examples in the Old Testament of angelic encounters. So by the time David wrote the Psalms, there was already a well-established Jewish understanding of angels, and so it was not remarkable that he would mention those in the Psalms. That's a short answer.
So you're gathering it up from basically a visual observation, but
no, from the Pentateuch and and who knows what experiences people had that was anecdotal, just as people today have anecdotal encounters with angels. It's not written down in the Bible, but it's a real experience for certain people, and it's been happening for a long time. So when you put all that evidence together, it's reasonable to conclude that these beings exist. But we don't worship them. The scripture is very clear that we're to worship God, not to worship any of his creation, including angels. And this is where many cults have gone wrong, and where some religions have gone wrong. And they've begun to worship the creation, which includes these higher beings, instead of God, the creator.
Yeah, thank you for that. I take us down a bunny trail. I apologize for that, but thanks for the explanation, Don.
It's okay.
On there.
Do you like your rabbit trails, Robert?
Hi.
Go ahead.
It's Audrey here. I just wanted to clarify something. Was man not created in its perfect form, in its perfect human form, as we see ourselves now? Or was there some evolutional aspect that we're supposed to consider?
No evolutionary aspect.
I'm sorry?
Was created as a perfect man physically.
Yes.
And then made Eve. And because of his perfection, he was able to live 950 something years.
Right.
Lifespans became shorter gradually after that till the present time.
Right.
So it was no evolution involved in the creation of man.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Something was said earlier that I didn't quite understand, and I just wanted to double check, because that's my belief and understanding too, that we were created in this perfect form and not in an evolutionary concept. Thanks.
If you want to find out more, you read the book Who Was Adam that Hugh Ross and Fuzz Rana wrote together.
Okay,
Just-
okay,
To put a really fine point on it, Audrey,
yes,
there has been some minor evolutionary change in human beings in the period of time that we've existed. For example, amongst Caucasian population, our little fingers are a little bit shorter than they used to be.
mhm,
But these are acquired changes over time that have nothing to do with being human or not human. They're very, very minor changes genetically that have happened. And it's what we call population drift. So these things are also well understood, but it's got nothing to do with, you know, humans evolving from some lower organism.
okay, that's great. Thank you so much. And just one more thing. In some spaces, there is a perception that within the human context, that some humans are superior to others in the notion of race and ethnic ethnicities. Can we just dispel that kind of craziness, or?
Absolutely, unequivocally.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
But alive today is a descendant of the 8 people that were on the ark. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. Those are the only people that survived the flood.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're all one family.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love the honesty of this discussion. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Why don't we end the meeting here? If you have more questions, actually, there's another question from Peony regarding the gap theory. You want to say anything about that?
What did she say?
Angelic wars and that condensation
Yes.
theory.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Peony. Yeah, so there's a number of creation theologies, I guess, out there. RTB, you may know this, we're known as progressive creationists or day-age creationists. There are other groups of Christians who view Genesis through a different lens. You know, young earth creationists, framework hypotheses guys. There's a whole group of different approaches to the book of Genesis, which we freely acknowledge. One of those is known as the gap theory. And the gap theory basically was put forward by, I'm not mistaken, I think it was in the Schofield.
Yeah.
The which? Dick's Bible? Okay. Where he put forward this theory that between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, there was a large gap in time. And during this period, Satan fell, the demons fell, the earth was devastated, and it all comes down to the use of 2 Hebrew words, tohu and bohu, and the interpretation of those 2 words in Genesis 2 rather. And so most theologians have dismissed this as a legitimate explanation for the process of creation, but it is one of those theological positions that has been put forward historically. So the argument is that the earth became formless and void because of the events between 1:1 and 1:2. But I think if what Hugh Ross has taught us tonight is true, then it would seem rather odd that God would leave out those important details when he seemed to go to great pains to explain the details of creation. Why would you leave out what was, you know, obviously would have been a hugely important piece of information? It just doesn't seem reasonable. There are other reasons to dismiss that particular view as well. But it is out there, and some Christians have adopted it over a number of years. Hope that helps, Peony. So most RTB people would not accept the gap theory as an explanation. Put it that way. But you can still be a Christian and believe the gap theory. It's all good.
So maybe we'll call it quits here. And I hope you can join us in person. Next month, we'll meet here in the same room again. And thank you for coming. And just watch your email. You'll get a summary of this meeting. And thank you for coming.